the spiritual power of laughter. This morning we are taking up Tarot Key number 15, the Devil. Now what's funny about this? As a matter of fact, the most important secret that exists in occult training is shown in this Tarot Key number 15, called the Devil. Those of you who have been exposed to certain kinds of exoteric religion, of course, have heard stories about good and evil. Some of you have been raised to believe that the devil and the Satan are just around. You have to watch out, just coming out after you from under every bed, behind every chair. What is the basic idea? Or what is this real secret involved with this tarot key? Well, first let's take up a few of the attributions, because remember, the shorthand of consciousness is really placed within the attributions of these tarot keys, the Hebrew letter that's assigned to it, the number, the title, as well as all the symbols. And when we become accustomed to this shorthand, we can more readily utilize the entire key for developing those states of mind and heart, which we are all aspiring towards. Well, now, to begin with, the Hebrew letter called Ayin. That means literally I. Whereas I would like to remind you, Tarot Key number 4, the Emperor, is assigned to the actual function of sight. The actual function, therefore, of vision. Here, what we're being shown is the organ, or we're being told that here we have a symbolic representation of the kind of consciousness that results from the eye as the organ of vision, or at least the kind of consciousness that results in those who interpret what they see in terms only of the eye as the organ of vision. The point is, we cannot fall into the trap of denials just because we become aware of certain principles, because in this manner we're not really coping with the so-called appearance or with the reality that's behind it. So we have people falling into these various categories. Some deliberately build illusions because they cannot bear whatever it is that they think they're seeing, not realizing that what they think they're seeing is an image in their own mind and not the thing that's out there. In other words, it's an interpretation. So that you can see, as Voltaire said, when man believes in absurdities, he commits atrocities. And certainly we can say Capricorn, which is the sign of the zodiac that's attributed to Key 15, the Devil, that Capricorn levels, which apply to 10th house astrologically, we'll talk about that in the class, that portion of it, but in the 10th house astrologically, you have a point which is said to be the highest point that you attain to career-wise on the physical plane. And it is this emphasis on attaining or giving values to the physical plane, which has to do with the eye that takes in impressions from the physical plane. When we judge by this outer organ only, we get into trouble. We have to learn how to interpret. Now, we learn how to interpret when we come to understand more than one factor that relates to this very tarot key. Because, for example, not only does this letter have attributed to it the idea of the eye as the organ of sight, but it also has attributed to it the word bondage. Now you'll notice the two figures there, which are supposed to be human, but they obviously are animalized humans. You notice these two figures are in bondage, they have a chain around their necks. And this chain is attached to the devil or Satan. So that obviously they are in bondage. Bondage is one of the attributions. And what we'll have to do is discover what it is that we're in bondage to when life is hell. Whenever life is hell, it's the first thing we have to look to. Is what is it that I'm in bondage to that's giving me this hell? Now then, along with the attribution of bondage, though, we have another very important attribution, and that is the fountain, like, the water fountain, a gushing fountain, and also the renewing intelligence. In other words, it's the fountain, Satan here, or the devil, apparently, then, and the eye is the organ of vision, or appearance, if you will, then, is apparently also, if we know how to see it, also fountain, the rushing fountain, and it is also that which renews us, the movement of consciousness that renews the person, the being, the life, the incarnation. Now, how could this be renewing, as fresh as a fountain? Then we go to the other attribution, mirth, because when we think of the idea of mirth or laughter, we think of something that is, the laughter itself is like a fountain, isn't it? Of course, some people don't sound much like a fountain, but anyway, they're supposed to. So that you have this renewing fountain of bubbling beingness involved with something that obviously is a very horrible looking creature. Well, we have here an indication that is again related to the eye as the organ of vision in this manner, just like when we look at the train, as I pointed out, and it's in movement. Say we are on the train in movement, the tracks are gathering themselves together, moving into one line behind us. Or when two trains are moving side by side and one is going faster, we might decide it's the other one that's going backwards. Whereas it isn't. Both may be going forward at a different speed. In other words, when we're interpreting a thing just because of what we see with the eye, we're falling into these various traps. Now here, in this figure of the devil, we're being shown something that Dr. Case calls completely incongruous, and that's one of the best words I can imagine being used. Because you have a creature that simply doesn't exist, just like what you think you see doesn't exist. It's the way our consciousness interprets what we see that makes us think a thing exists in the way we see it. Consciousness does the real seeing, not the eye. However, we are consistently, even though we know it with our intellect, we are consistently taken in by this impact of sight, of things that seem to be out there. And so we continuously react to the out-there-ness. Now, in Kabbalah, remember the fact that ayin is attributed to the eye as the organ of vision. We're being told something more than that which relates to the eye alone. We're being told that any of the vibrations coming in from what appears to be the outside are being interpreted by consciousness. And so the basic thing that has to be understood is that when we decide a thing out there is as consciousness has interpreted it, in other words, in accordance with the illusion, whatever that illusion is that has been presented, if consciousness is not able to correct the illusion, then consciousness is going to make decisions that's based on the interpretation of the image that it has registered as a result of the vibrations. In other words, the way we decide we are going to act or not act, our decisions about tomorrow, about other people, become more and more, without our realizing it, they become more and more dependent on outer circumstances or things that we have come to call the physical or the material world. And so we become immersed in interpretations, in evaluations that are strictly material. Not that there's anything wrong with the material world, you understand. We're talking about our evaluation, our use of it, the value we put upon it as against other values. We become immersed in this, and without realizing it, we act more materialistic than some people who announce themselves as being atheistic and materialistic. And there again, we're taken in without realizing that we're being taken in by this illusion. The result is we're not utilizing this energy in the proper way, because by being taken in, by thinking of all of the outside as reality, or what seems to be occurring, as the reality as interpreted by our own consciousness, what we do is find ourselves in conditions and situations continuously. Let's start having a few examples that I hope will delight you. I hope. Fingers crossed. Anyway, for one thing, all of us have a need to be loved. All of us have a need to be appreciated. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing. We should have this need, or we wouldn't do anything to try to improve our image or to develop an ability to project a more beautiful and lovable image to others, whichever way you want to put it, whether it's image of ourselves or to others or both. So I'm not criticizing the need to be loved or the need to be appreciated. However, in this need to be loved, in this need to be appreciated, we have become so conditioned by apparent things, by appearances, because of the ability of consciousness, particularly the analytical consciousness, which on the Tree of Life you see, this tarot key combines the analytical consciousness of Hod, splendor, to beauty, which is the central self, also incidentally the Son of God, the real basic individuality. It is the key of the devil, iron, that connects those two spheres of activity. And that in itself is a fantastic occult message. Just the areas that are shown to combine via the energy of that function. Because you see, it is in the analytical abilities of the intellect that we fall into our traps. And what we don't realize is that the analytical abilities of the intellect, of the mind, in themselves or in itself, whichever way you want to put it, is something that doesn't exist as a total thing. It is a function. It isn't a whole thing in itself. Now, to understand this as being a function, that is our analytical processes, that's where we make so many of our mistakes. Let's go back to Genesis for just a moment. Not very long, just for a little bit of a moment. And if you will recall, when Eve was being tempted, and incidentally, the devil here is the tempter, remember? The Spirit even led Jesus up to the mountaintop to be tempted of Satan. So we have something here that seems to be very much tied up with the temptation. Well, you remember the tempter, which in Genesis is the serpent, and that's tied up with this key in many ways. After getting Eve to listen, sort of insinuatingly, pointing things out to her, agreed, once it was pointed out by the tempter, that tree of the knowledge of good and evil was good to look upon. Do you remember that in Genesis? It was good to look upon. Now look at this fantastic depth that's involved here, of perception. Because what is it, basically, the fruit of the tree itself, the whole tree of the knowledge of good and evil, being good to look upon? You might say, after all, who put the tree there? Who? God or Satan? Or, and here's a nice little shock, is there any difference? Is it not perhaps what we call something we don't understand, since we don't have any realization of what God is yet, and therefore we have no realization of what Satan is and is not? Because who put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden? So that if it's good to look upon, then who is the tempter? Why would God put something in the Garden of Eden and make it good to look upon if God didn't intend to tempt Adam and Eve? I ask you. Obviously, God wanted Adam and Eve to fall into temptation. Now, that pentagram that you see there tells us the biggest secret of all. Because if you will notice, that pentagram is upside down. And that is incidentally considered the most evil symbol in all occultism. There is no symbol that can compare to this symbol in evil. That is an upside down pentagram. Subconsciousness, remember, knows the language of symbol. Subconsciousness doesn't have to learn it. When we're studying the meaning of symbols, we're studying it because we're working at making this knowledge conscious so that we can gain more of the conscious controls, which it is our destiny to have, so that when we are led by the Spirit up to the mountaintop or behind a house or anywhere else to be tempted, so that we will know how to respond and to recognize the temptations. And there'll certainly be more than one. Whoever heard of only one temptation, life would become very boring after a while. And we would go out and we deliberately get ourselves into trouble. That's temptation, in order to have a little excitement. Is there anything more lethal than waking up and having absolutely nothing to do, no one to see, nothing to worry about, nothing to hope for, just nothing? That's lethal. We have to, if there's nothing happening, we have to go out and make it happen, even if it means getting into trouble. So something in us figures better fight with the devil, or even have hell to pay, than be an empty nothing, no experience, no growth, no interest. Well, of course, that's not a mature way to do it, you understand. It's very immature, but I'm just pointing out that when the soul, when the consciousness has not come to a point where it recognizes the true principles of the pair of opposites, the true principles that exist in the idea of good and evil, the true principles that are involved in the ability to differentiate, to analyze. When the person has not come to see this, or to at least want to see this, to work at seeing and learning these things, then it cannot remain static. It's simply, there's no such thing. The Lord of the universe doesn't permit non-movement. In the universe, the one thing you can be sure of is that everything is in movement. Laughter will melt the heart of a stone, but there's one thing it will not melt, and that is an individual who's all caught up with a sense of their own importance. In other words, an individual identified with the importance of their personalities, an individual who decides he is this role on the stage of life, strutting around with all the egotism, just strutting and ranting, and with the eyes always have a special smirk. If you think eyes can't smirk, just take a look in the mirror sometimes when you're pleased with yourself. We all have eyes that smirk fabulously. But when we're aware of it, it becomes a delight. This is the point, awareness. And of course it is in eating of the knowledge of good and evil, or in having the experiences of the pair of opposites that has developed this analytical, discriminating power. This is what develops in us, finally. The capacity to know the difference, to tell the difference between the persona, the personality, and the true self. And when we don't, or can't, we walk in bondage, right here. And yet, through this bondage, we have to go through this bondage to get to the beauty of the true self, you notice? But we have to leave the analytical, not to lose it, but we have to leave it as far as identifying our selfhood. Then our analytical abilities become a tool that we use for God. Not only for God, but with God. The truth of the matter is, every single human being, every soul, every center of the consciousness of God, sooner or later is going to wake up to discover, I said, remember, sooner or later, to discover that every single human being I have ever injured, I've injured myself. In other words, the one you call your enemy, or the one who hurt you, or betrayed you. Suppose you start saying to yourself, if you can, or at least if you can't, try. Does it hurt to try? And if you don't succeed, is it going to hurt to try again? You know, this makes it the most practical thing in the world to decide if God is the one, the only, blessed be He, and God is. And everything that is an appearance of the divine within this framework of my senses, an appearance of the divine. Then whatever the evil appearance, and it's evil, we'll be able to truly fight it. We'll be able to overcome it. And this is what we're here for, to overcome the appearances, to overcome the immaturities, to overcome the evils. And we overcome them by getting over our delusions regarding the illusions. We get over it, first of all. We stop thinking that our personalities are so fantastically important as against other personalities. This is the point. You know, why should I have to be more beautiful than you? Well, if I can manage it, I will. So why should I have to? No. Why should I have to be smarter than you? Well, if I can work it out and get enough data going, I will. But why should I have to? No. Why should I have to be more lovable than you? But I work at being lovable. Yeah, you'd think maybe I haven't been working at it so hard this morning. After all, shocking you like that? But you know, the people we love the most are the ones that make us laugh. My sister usually really taught me something when I was very young. They make us laugh because they're helping us to laugh at something that we should be laughing at. It is, and this is what we're learning to do, to correct the illusions so that we can stop being deluded and act from the deluded idea that anybody is separate from anybody else. To start walking around, you notice beauty, searching for the beauty of God everywhere. Now there's the thing. We have to fall in love with ourselves. This is for sure. But what part of ourselves? This egotistical, oh, I'm irresistible bit? Or this egotistical, oh, mine is such a tragic, or mine is such a whatever? No, what we fall in love with is our capacity to search for, to see, to respond to beauty, to make it. Our capacity to be concerned with the other portions of our true divine being that appears out there. What a miracle! What a miracle that God has given me the capacity to experience me in every one of you. I tell you, I'm a genius. Obviously. Look at the beauty I'm seeing. Why am I a genius? Because God's in me, experiencing beauty. And every time you experience beauty, you're expressing your divine genius, which really, in the final analysis, belongs to all of us, but each in that special, unique way. each in that fantastic, glorious, special, unique, individual way, yours and mine, getting that pentagram right side up then, using our analytical abilities, loving the mind and the intellect for what it can do, but using it properly, seeing the pairs of opposites, but to stop responding from this nonsense level of being lost in the personality, then you can really enjoy your personality. Your personality becomes fun. You are meant to walk in joy. How is God going to experience joy? Unless its centers are joyful. You see, you're betraying God when you don't laugh. How do you like that? Now, I'm going to start giving you a guilt complex for new reasons. Okay? Let's throw away the guilt complexes for the previous one. Now, I want us to start feeling guilty whenever we're cheating God of the laughter, of chuckling at the posturings of the personality. And I want us to start having a guilt complex whenever we start feeding into this, oh, my life has been so sad and weary and burdened. I want us to start developing a good guilt complex whenever we find ourselves upside downing the pentagram instead of letting the spirit guide the rest of the nature and be in charge. Beauty is the central theme. God is growing centers to experience more and more rapturous, ecstatic beauty of the unity and love. And believe me, darlings, God does not get her feelings hurt so easily that you can't afford a little argument or two with her or a little discussion with the power with him. God is pretty big, mature. I'd say God's mature, so you can afford to have a little play and laughter between your personality and God, and let that be the guide to true illumination.